In Greek mythology, Orion was a giant huntsman whom Zeus placed among the stars as the constellation of Orion. Ancient sources tell several different stories about Orion. There are two major versions of his birth and several versions of his death. The most important recorded episodes are his birth somewhere in Boeotia, his visit to Chios where he met Merope and was blinded by her father, Oenopion, the recovery of his sight at Lemnos, his hunting with Artemis on Crete, his death by the bow of Artemis, the sting of the giant Scorpion which became Scorpio, and his elevation to the heavens. Most ancient sources omit some of these episodes and several tell only one. These various incidents may originally have been independent, unrelated stories, and it is impossible to tell whether omissions are simple brevity or represent a real disagreement. In Greek literature he first appears as a great hunter in Homer's epic The Odyssey, where Odysseus sees his shade in the underworld. The bare bones of his story are told by the Hellenistic and Roman collectors of myths, but there is no extant literary version of his adventures comparable, for example, to that of Jason in Apollonius of Rhodes, Argonautica, or Euripides' Medea. The entry in Ovid's Fasti for May 11th is a poem on the birth of Orion, but that is one version of a single story. The surviving fragments of legend have provided a fertile field for speculation about Greek prehistory and myth. Orion served several roles in ancient Greek culture. The story of the Adventures of Orion, the hunter, is the one on which we have the most evidence. He is also the personification of the constellation of the same name. He was venerated as a hero, in the Greek sense, in the region of Boeotia, and there is one etiological passage which says that Orion was responsible for the present shape of the Strait of Sicily. Legends. Homer and Hesiod. Orion is mentioned in the oldest surviving works of Greek literature, which probably date back to the 7th or 8th century BC, but which are the products of an oral tradition with origins several centuries earlier. In Homer's Iliad, Orion is described as a constellation, and the star Sirius is mentioned as his dog. In the Odyssey, Odysseus sees him hunting in the underworld with a bronze club, a great slayer of animals. He is also mentioned as a constellation, is the lover of the goddess Dawn, as slain by Artemis, and as the most handsome of the earthborn. In the works and days of Hesiod, Orion is also a constellation, one whose rising and setting with the sun is used to reckon the year. The legend of Orion was first told in full in a lost work by Hesiod, probably the Astronomia. Simple references to Hesiod will refer to this, unless otherwise stated. This version is known through the work of a Hellenistic author on the constellations. He gives a fairly long summary of Hesiod's discourse on Orion. According to this version, Orion was likely the son of the sea god Poseidon and Euryale, daughter of Minos, king of Crete. Orion could walk on the waves because of his father. He walked to the island of Chios where he got drunk and attacked Merope, daughter of Oenopion, the ruler there. In vengeance, Oenopion blinded Orion and drove him away. Orion stumbled to Lemnos where Hephaestus, the lamesmith god, had his forge. Hephaestus told his servant, Daedalion, to guide Orion to the uttermost east where Helios the sun healed him. Orion carried Daedalion around on his shoulders. Orion returned to Chios to punish Oenopion, but the king hid away underground and escaped Orion's wrath. Orion's next journey took him to Crete where he hunted with the goddess Artemis and her mother Leto, and in the course of the hunt, threatened to kill every beast on earth. Mother Earth objected and sent a giant scorpion to kill Orion. A creature succeeded, and after his death, the goddesses asked Zeus to place Orion among the constellations. Zeus consented and, as a memorial to the hero's death, added the scorpion to the heavens as well. Other sources. Although Orion has a few lines in both Homeric poems and in the works and days, most of the stories about him are recorded in incidental allusions and in fairly obscure later writings. No great poets standardized the legend. The ancient sources for Orion's legend are mostly notes in the margins of ancient poets or compilations by later scholars, the equivalent of modern reference works or encyclopedias. Even the legend from Hesiod's astronomy survives only in one such compilation, in several cases, including the summary of the astronomy, although the surviving work bears the name of a famous scholar, such as Apollodorus of Athens, Eratosthenes, or Gaius Julius Hyginus. What survives is either an ancient forgery or an abridgment of the original compilation by a later writer of dubious competence. Editors of these texts suggest that they may have borne the names of great scholars because they were abridgments, or even pupils' notes based on the works of the scholars. The margin of the Empress Eudoxia's copy of the Iliad has a note summarizing a Hellenistic poet who tells a different story of Orion's birth. Here the gods Zeus, Hermes and Poseidon come to visit Hiereus of Tanagra, who roasts a whole bull for them. When they offer him a favor, he asks for the birth of sons. The gods take the bull's hide and ejaculate or urinate into it and bury it in the earth, then tell him to dig it up 10 months later. When he does, he finds Orion. This explains why Orion is earthborn. A second full telling is in a Roman-era collection of myths. The account of Orion is based largely on the mythologist and poet Pherecydes of Leros. Here Orion is described as earthborn and enormous in stature. This version also mentions Poseidon and Euryale as his parents. It adds a first marriage to Side before his marriage to Merope. All that is known about Side is that Hera threw her into Hades for rivaling her in beauty. It also gives a different version of Orion's death than the Iliad. Eos the Dawn fell in love with Orion and took him to Delos where Artemis killed him. Another narrative on the constellations, 3 paragraphs long, is from a Latin writer whose brief notes have come down to us under the name of Hyginus. It begins with the Oxide story of Orion's birth, which this source ascribes to Callimachus and Aristomachus, and sets the location at Thebes or Chios. Hyginus has 2 versions. In one of them he omits Poseidon. A modern critic suggests this is the original version. The same source tells 2 stories of the death of Orion. The first says that because of his living joined in too great a friendship with the Oenopion, he boasted to Artemis and Leto that he could kill anything which came from Earth. Earth objected and created the Scorpion. In the second story, Apollo objected to his sister Artemis's love for Orion, and, seeing Orion swimming with just his head visible, challenged her to shoot at that mark, which she hit, killing him. He connects Orion with several constellations, not just Scorpio. Orion chased Pleione, the mother of the Pleiades, for 7 years, until Zeus intervened and raised all of them to the stars. In Works and Days, Orion chases the Pleiades themselves. Canis Minor and Canis Major are his dogs. The one in front is called Procyon. They chase Lepus the hare, although Hyginus says some critics thought this too base a prey for the noble Orion and have him pursuing Taurus, the bull, instead. A Renaissance mythographer adds other names for Orion's dogs: Luco Melarena, Mera, Dromus, Cesator, Lampuris, Lycoctonus, Toophagus, Arctophonus. Variants. There are numerous variants in other authors. Most of these are incidental references in poems and scholiasts. The Roman poet Virgil shows Orion as a giant wading through the Aegean Sea with the waves breaking against his shoulders, rather than, as the mythographers have it, walking on the water. There are several references to Hiereus as the father of Orion that connect him to various places in Boeotia, including Hyria. This may well be the original story, since Hiereus is presumably the eponym of Iria. He is also called Aeneas, although he is not the Caledonian Aeneas. Other ancient scholars say, as Hesiod does, that Orion was the son of Poseidon and his mother was a daughter of Minos, but they call the daughter Brillihylis. There are two versions where Artemis killed Orion, either with her arrows or by producing the Scorpion. In the second variant, Orion died of the scorpion sting as he does in Hesiod. Although Orion does not defeat the scorpion in any version, several variants have it die from its wounds. Artemis is given various motives. One is that Orion boasted of his beast killing and challenged her to a contest with the discus. Another is that he assaulted either Artemis or the Hyperborean maiden Opus in her band of huntresses. Aratus's brief description in his Astronomy conflates the elements of the myth. According to Aratus, Orion attacks Artemis while hunting on Chios, and the scorpion kills him there. Nicander, in his Theriaca, has the scorpion of ordinary size and hiding under a small stone. Most versions of the story that continue after Orion's death tell of the gods raising Orion and the scorpion to the stars. But even here a variant exists. Ancient poets differ greatly as to who Aesculapius brought back from the dead. The Argive epic poet Telesarchus is quoted as saying in Ascolion that Aesculapius resurrected Orion. Other ancient authorities are quoted anonymously that Aesculapius healed Orion after he was blinded by Oenopion. The story of Orion and Oenopion also varies. One source refers to Merope as the wife of Oenopion and not his daughter. Another refers to Merope as the daughter of Minos and not of Oenopion. The longest version is from a collection of melodramatic plots drawn up by an Alexandrian poet for the Roman Cornelius Gallus to make into Latin verse. It describes Orion as slaying the wild beasts of Chios and looting the other inhabitants to make a bride price for Oenopion's daughter, who is called Ero. Oenopion does not want to marry her to someone like Orion, and eventually Orion, in frustration, breaks into her bedchamber and rapes her. The text implies that Oenopion blinds him on the spot. Lucian includes a picture with Orion in a rhetorical description of an ideal building, in which Orion is walking into the rising sun with Lemnos nearby, Daedalian on his shoulder. He recovers his sight though with Hephaestus still watching in the background. The next picture deals with the ancient story of Orion. He is blind, and on his shoulder carries Daedalian, who directs the sightless eyes towards the east. The rising sun heals his infirmity, and there stands Hephaestus on Lemnos watching the cure. Latin sources add that Oenopion was the son of Dionysus. Dionysus sent satyrs to put Orion into a deep sleep so he could be blinded. One source tells the same story but converts Oenopion into Minos of Crete. It adds that an oracle told Orion that his sight could be restored by walking eastward and that he found his way by hearing the Cyclops hammer. Placing a cyclops as a guide on his shoulder, it does not mention Caberia Lemnos. This is presumably the story of Daedalian recast. Both Hephaestus and the Cyclopes were said to make thunderbolts. They are combined in other sources. One Scolian, on a Latin poet, explains that Hephaestus gave Orion a horse. Giovanni Boccaccio cites a lost Latin writer for the story that Orion and Candiope were son and daughter of Oenopion, king of Sicily. While the virgin huntsman Orion was sleeping in a cave, Venus seduced him. As he left the cave, he saw his sister shining as she crossed in front of it. He ravished her. When his father heard of this, he banished Orion. Orion consulted an oracle, which told him that if he went east, he would regain the glory of kingship. Orion, Candiope, and the son Hippologus sailed to Thrace, a province eastward from Sicily. There he conquered the inhabitants, and became known as the son of Neptune. His son begat the Dryas mentioned in Statius. Cult and popular appreciation. In ancient Greece, Orion had a hero cult in the region of Boeotia. The number of places associated with his birth suggests that it was widespread. Here, the most frequently mentioned, was in the territory of Tanagra. A feast of Orion was held at Tanagra as late as the Roman Empire. They had a tomb of Orion most likely at the foot of Mount Cericius. Maurice Bowra argues that Orion was a national hero of the Boeotians much as Castor and Pollux were for the Dorians. He bases this claim on the Athenian epigram on the Battle of Chaeronea, in which a hero gave the Boeotian army an oracle, then fought on the side and defeated the Athenians. The Boeotian school of epic poetry was chiefly concerned with the genealogies of the gods and heroes. Later writers elaborated this web. Several other myths are attached to Orion in this way. A papyrus fragment of the Boeotian poet Corinna gives Orion 50 sons. This included the oracular hero Acryphon, who, she sings, gave a response to Asopus regarding Asopus's daughters who were abducted by the gods. Corinna sang of Orion conquering and naming all the land of the dawn. Bowra argues that Orion was believed to have delivered oracles as well, probably at a different shrine. Hyginus says that Hylas's mother was Menedose, daughter of Orion. Another mythographer, Liberalis, tells of many Panmetiosh, daughters of Orion, who sacrificed themselves for their country's good and were transformed into comets. Orion also has etiological connection to the city of Messina in Sicily. Diodorus of Sicily wrote a history of the world up to his own time. He starts with the gods and the heroes. At the end of this part of the work, he tells the story of Orion and two wonder stories of his mighty earthworks in Sicily. One tells how he aided Zanclus, the founder of Zancle, by building the promontory which forms the harbor. The other, which Diodorus ascribes to Hesiod, relates that there was once a broad sea between Sicily and the mainland. Orion built the whole Pelorus, the Punta del Ferro, and the temple to Poseidon at the tip, after which he settled in Euboea. He was then numbered among the stars of heaven and thus won for himself immortal remembrance. The Renaissance historian and mathematician Francesco Moralico, who came from Messina, identified the remains of a temple of Orion near the present Messina Cathedral. Moralico also designed an ornate fountain, built by the sculptor Giovanni Angelo Montorsoli in 1547, in which Orion is a central figure, symbolizing the Emperor Charles V, also a master of the sea and restorer of Messina. Orion is still a popular symbol of the city. Images of Orion in classical art are difficult to recognize, and clear examples are rare. There are several ancient Greek images of club-carrying hunters that could represent Orion, but such generic examples could equally represent an archetypal hunter, or indeed Heracles. Some claims have been made that other Greek art represents specific aspects of the Orion myth. A tradition of this type has been discerned in 5th century BC Greek pottery. John Beazley identified a scene of Apollo, Delian palm in hand, revenging Orion for the attempted rape of Artemis, while another scholar has identified a scene of Orion attacking Artemis as she is revenged by a snake in a funerary group, supposedly symbolizing the hope that even the criminal Orion could be made immortal, as well as an astronomical scene in which Cephalus is thought to stand in for Orion and his constellation, also reflecting this system of iconography. Also, a tomb frieze in Taranto may show Orion attacking Opus, but the earliest surviving clear depiction of Orion in classical art is Roman. For the depictions of the underworld scenes of the Odyssey discovered at the Esquiline Hill, Orion is also seen on a 4th century bas-relief, currently affixed to a wall in the Porto neighborhood of Naples. The constellation Orion rises in November, the end of the sailing season, and was associated with stormy weather, and this characterization extended to the mythical Orion. The bas-relief may be associated with the sailors of the city. Interpretations. Renaissance mythographers have discussed Orion at least since the Renaissance of classical learning. The Renaissance interpretations were allegorical. In the 14th century, Boccaccio interpreted the oxide story as representing human conception, the hide is the womb, Neptune the moisture of semen, Jupiter its heat, and Mercury the female coldness. He also explained Orion's death at the hands of the moon goddess as the moon producing winter storms. The 16th century Italian mythographer Natales Comes interpreted the whole story of Orion as an allegory of the evolution of a storm cloud, begotten by air, water, and the sun. A storm cloud is diffused, rises through the upper air, chills, and is turned into rain by the moon. He also explains how Orion walked on the sea, since the subtler part of the water which is rarefied rests on the surface. It is said that Orion learned from his father how to walk on water. Similarly, Orion's conception made him a symbol of the philosophical child, an allegory of philosophy springing from multiple sources, in the Renaissance as in alchemical works, with some variations. The 16th century German alchemist Michael Mayer lists the fathers as Apollo, Vulcan and Mercury, and the 18th century French alchemist Antoine-Joseph Petit gave them as Jupiter, Neptune and Mercury. Modern mythographers have seen the story of Orion as a way to access local folk tales and cultic practices directly without the interference of ancient high culture. Several of them have explained Orion, each through his own interpretation of Greek prehistory and of how Greek mythology represents it. There are some points of general agreement between them. For example, that the attack on Opus is an attack on Artemis, for Opus is one of the names of Artemis. There was a movement in the late 19th century to interpret all the Boeotian heroes as merely personifications of the constellations. There has since come to be wider agreement that the myth of Orion existed before there was a constellation named for him. Homer, for example, mentions Orion, the hunter, and Orion, the constellation, but never confuses the two. Once Orion was recognized as a constellation, astronomy in turn affected the myth. The story of Side may well be a piece of astronomical mythology. The Greek word Side means pomegranate, which bears fruit, while Orion, the constellation, can be seen in the night sky. Rose suggests she is connected with Side in Boeotia, and that the pomegranate, as a sign of the underworld, is connected with her descent there. The 19th century German classical scholar Erwin Rohde viewed Orion as an example of the Greeks erasing the line between the gods and mankind. That is, if Orion was in the heavens, other mortals could hope to be also. The Hungarian mythographer Karl Kerényi, one of the founders of the modern study of Greek mythology, wrote about Orion in Gods of the Greeks. Kerényi portrays Orion as a giant of titanic vigor and criminality, born outside his mother as were Titius and Dionysus. Kerényi places great stress on the variant in which Merope is the wife of Oenopion. He sees this as the remnant of a lost form of the myth in which Merope was Orion's mother. Orion's blinding is therefore parallel to that of Agypius and Oedipus. In Dionysus, Kerényi portrays Orion as a shamanic hunting hero, surviving from Minoan times. Kerényi derives Hiereus from the Cretan dialect word Omicron New Hierin, meaning beehive, which survives only in ancient dictionaries. For this association he turns Orion into a representative of the old mead-drinking cultures. was overcome by the wine masters Oenopion and Aeneas. Fontaineroz cites a source stating that Oenopion taught the Chians how to make wine before anybody else knew how. Joseph Fontaineroz wrote Orion, the myth of the hunter and the huntress, to show Orion as the type specimen of a variety of grotesque hero. Fontaineroz views him as similar to Cuchulain, that is, stronger, larger, and more potent than ordinary men, and the violent lover of the divine huntress. Other heroes of the same type are Actaeon, Leucippus, Cephalus, Tiresias, and Zeus as the lover of Callisto. Fontaineroz also sees Eastern parallels in the figures of Akat, Attis, Dum-Uzi, Gilgamesh, Dushyantha, and Prajapati. In the Greek myths, Robert Graves views Oenopion as his perennial year king, at the stage where the king pretends to die at the end of his term and appoints a substitute, in this case Orion, who actually dies in his place. His blindness is iconotropy from a picture of Odysseus blinding the Cyclops, mixed with a purely Hellenic solar legend. The sun hero is captured and blinded by his enemies at dusk, but escapes and regains his sight at dawn, when all beasts flee him. Graves sees the rest of the myth as a syncretism of diverse stories. These include Gilgamesh and the Scorpion men, Set becoming a scorpion to kill Horus, and the story of Ikat and Yatpan from Ras Shamra, as well as a conjectural story of how the priestesses of Artemis Opus killed a visitor to their island of Ortygia. He compares Orion's birth from the bull's hide to a West African rain-making charm and claims that the son of Poseidon should be a rainmaker.